everyone, and welcome to the Asher Marketing Podcast. I'm Anthony Giuliano, and my guest this week is Ericka McCauley. Ericka, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I am good. You and I have been spending a lot of time together over email and on Microsoft Teams because of the many projects we're working on together, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, we appreciate y'all. So it's been
Are you managing to keep your head above water?
I think now it's starting where you can see the top of my head. So that's a marked improvement.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me. I know you're busy, so we'll get right to it. One of the first things I ask our guests to talk about is their career path, and you kind of revealed this when you used y'all in the intro. You are not from Northwest Indiana. You are from Texas, correct?
Yes, I was born in Houston and raised outside of Houston and spent most of my life in Texas, but we made our way to Indiana thanks to my husband's job. So yeah, but it all began in Texas.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about your career path, because if LinkedIn is correct, you were a communication major and you're still in the world of communication. When did you know that that's what you were interested in doing, and how did that manifest itself at the start of your career?
Sure. So I actually wanted to be an environmental lawyer. Mm-hmm. And I worked for an environmental lawyer or a lawyer in high school, and he told me I needed to go and get an engineering degree. But then I tried to do engineering at the University of Texas at Austin, and I thought, I'm not going to make it. Yeah. So I decided to switch to communication studies and loved it. I tried to get into the PR program at UT, but the program chair laughed at me when I told him I wanted to go to law school.
Oh, wow.
So he didn't see how, PR and law degrees were related. But anyways, I stuck with communication studies, and I think that has helped me adapt to different situations that I've been in throughout my career.
Sure. So was the environmental law, was that at all Aaron Brockovich inspired, or is that completely unrelated? I know some folks who have gone down that path, and that was kind of the genesis for them.
It actually started, I think, in a high school biology class. We had to choose between dissecting plants or insects, and I chose flowers.
Okay.
And I just remember going to these different fields outside of Katy, Texas, looking for flowers. And I thought, well, maybe this is what I should do is save the environment.
All right. Well, and you're a friend to animals everywhere, so you chose to dissect the flowers. All right. So after college, what are some of the jobs you have, and how do you get into them, and why do you move on from them?
Well, actually, one of the biggest steps in my career was during college, where I got to work on a political campaign. My first one was for a governor's race in Texas. I was doing outreach work. And one of the big stories I always like to tell was that, it's so important to stay on message, not just at the top, but at the bottom too, because I'll never forget, closer towards election day, we were going out and visiting voters that we had already ID'd as supporting the candidate. And, when you're working on political campaigns, it's 80, 100 hours a week. And, plus being a full-time college student. So didn't have a lot of time for TV or anything else that was going on inside the world or outside in the world about the campaign. And a few of the voters had said, well, what's with this ad accusing your candidate of putting a hit on a DEA agent?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's not something you would ever think you would ever come across.
Yeah.
But yeah, that really was just a moment for me, because we weren't prepared, none of the field staff across the state of Texas, that this ad was going on, or that we would have these pointers. I mean, we obviously know our candidate didn't put a hit on a DEA agent, but just the surprise reaction, that you could have. So that was sort of the catalyst for everything else, moving forward.
Yeah, well, it's really easy to get sort of myopic in those situations when you're working on something you're passionate about. you need that objectivity occasionally of the outside world. I know I've done it in many different ways, but to hear from people who have a different perspective so that you, one, can be reminded that, there's other voices out there, but two, so you can adapt to it and understand, obviously that's the one that you were faced with is a pretty big challenge to adapt to, but nevertheless, you got to know it's out there.
Yeah, it was a pretty interesting story. I like to tell. But I think too was part of my catalyst. I continued working on political campaigns after college, but that wasn't a life for me.
Yeah.
I didn't have a big bank account to support those in between downtimes or be on the road all the time. I did go to graduate school, not to law school. So I decided I wanted to go into communications, and I got my master's in communications with a concentration in PR. But there I really wanted to look at how political campaigns are essentially PR campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there I went to work for a national estuary program that we reported to the state's environmental agency in Texas, and just got to work on some really cool issues that just shaped the foundation. It was another, turning point for shaping my career, where you really learned to build consensus. So those estuary programs are set up around the country where you have to work with stakeholders at federal, state, local level. You have to work with industry, businesses, nonprofits, people who are not like-minded, bringing them together to the table in order to just manage whatever it is that the estuary is trying to manage. I got to touch on crisis communications, risk communications. Anytime when you're dealing with environmental stuff, there's always a crisis or some risk you need to prepare for. Sometimes I think crises can be avoided. Sometimes agencies tend to spiral into causing a crisis that didn't need to be there, but you learn to adapt and manage those, and more importantly, building those relationships that you're a trusted resource so that they can come to you. And then if you have those general plans already in place, you just easily activate one of those or adapt them into any of those types of situations. Sure.
So are there other stops before you get to Indiana, or do you go from there to Indiana?
Yeah, I go from there to Indiana, and I came here the day before Thanksgiving in 2012.
Okay. All right.
I think I was wearing shorts.
Yeah. So you and I are both transplants from other parts of the world. What were your first impressions of Indiana in November?
Very cold.
Yeah.
Not good food. I think having the luxury of just different types of food, and whether it's Houston, Austin, or San Antonio. And then I think the weather was just something I think now I'm starting to adjust to, but I don't know.
So you're cold, you're hungry, you're probably tired. You're like the poem on the Statue of Liberty. You're yearning to breathe free, yeah.
And I didn't understand the concept of no sun for days.
Yeah.
I did not. And learning how to prepare to go outside. Mm-hmm. That was something I never had to do in the 31 years of my life prior to moving up here.
Yeah.
I didn't. Yes, that was quite an adjustment for me.
Yeah, for sure. So you're at Ivy Tech at this point, correct? You take a job with Ivy Tech. Is that your first job in Indiana?
No, actually, I started at a TV station here.
Oh, okay.
Little PBS TV station.
Yeah.
In communications, if you're just out for a while, and it can be harder to get employed. But too, I wanted to make friends, and so took a job that was close to home. But of course, it was entry level, and I should have known better.
Sure.
But moved on to healthcare, and then got into Ivy Tech.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we met.
That's right. That's right. So talk a little bit about your role at Ivy Tech. Ivy Tech is probably known by most of the people listening to this podcast, but it's complex. It has campuses all around the state. Each of those campuses is a little bit different. And community colleges have, challenges and strengths that other colleges and universities don't have. What was your experience like during your time there?
It was actually really nice to be able to tap into an established team of communication colleagues that were around the state and an agency. I had that when I worked at the state's environmental agency. There was a staff at headquarters, but nothing like Ivy Tech that you could just tap into. And that's when I realized it was so important to be able to build relationship with other peers in your field. That way you can ask them advice, counsel on different situations, because a lot of times you might feel like you're the only person doing this, or it might be just you it's happening to, but in reality, it's just, a standard experience. I think too with Ivy Tech is really, I was over enrollment marketing, so it took me a while to really understand what that was. But it was an opportunity to diversify from PR into marketing, and definitely use, the knowledge and expertise of those around me to help with that. But it was definitely interesting. I would have to say that in types of all the political environments, Ivy Tech might have been the most.
Yeah.
Just in terms of the number of people you have to get buy-in for. I think at that time it was 7 campuses. So there were 7 campus presidents.
Wow.
2 foundations, 2 sets of vice chancellors, 2 sets of deans.
Yeah.
You got to get people's input because you want the input throughout, so people have buy-in. And then you had central office and Indy.
Yeah. Yeah, and higher ed can be really hierarchical, and I say this as someone who's been both the victim of that and the victimizer because I'm on a board and have done other things. But you're in an environment where there's a lot of people who can claim to be the smartest person in the room, and sometimes you feel that when you're trying to get a decision made.
Then not every decision has to be a committee, right?
Yeah. So for sure, sometimes there are committees for the committees. So you're there for about 4 years, is that correct?
At Ivy Tech, I was there actually less than 2.
Less than 2. I don't know where I got 4 from. Okay, maybe it just felt like it was 4.
Probably had a few gray hairs from that.
Yeah.
They hired a admissions director that we just had different ideas of what needed to go where, and they wanted to take it in a different direction. So I thought, well, that's not the direction I agree with, and the opportunity to just go out on my own for a little bit, which I think was good because it helped me get back to doing what I love instead of just that being all that energy sucked down.
Yeah, for sure. So how long do you do your own thing then?
I did it probably for a year and a half. I worked with some documentarians to help with their films, and one of them was about the Indiana Dunes. So we actually used that film when I was trying to research, how do you market documentaries and, how to make the most of a documentary. It was always, what can a call to action be? And in this film, it had uncovered that the Indiana Dunes was first proposed as the nation's first national park.
Oh, wow.
Years ago, yes, but it never, for a variety of reasons, just never took off. So when I met with my documentarians, I said, look, why don't we use this film as the catalyst for that? And, thanks to their relationship that they had and PR, marketing, it's a lot of behind the scenes work where we don't get credit for a lot of those things. But Indiana Dunes finally became a national park. And if you ask the Park Service director for Indiana Dunes, he would credit this film.
Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that connection. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, and too, when you're working with government agencies, it's sort of like you can't market this, but we are marketing it. And then, there's a nice dance too that you do with your congressional representatives. But, in the end, we got it done 100 years later. So.
Oh, wow. Well, hopefully your next accomplishment won't take quite that long, but that's a big one. That's great. Yeah. Oh, wow. I didn't realize that. That's awesome. So you're doing your own thing. Is your son born around that same time or is that later?
Yeah, I had him right before I started at Ivy Tech. And then I think he was probably 2 at the time. So I was trying to juggle going out on my own and then having him, which was a real struggle, but we were able to put him back into daycare. And then, to be honest, I just got scared with a lot of changes that were happening at the national level in terms of healthcare and student loans. But wow, how would this be sustainable for the long term? It was nice. I got to pick my own clients, which I know that's not always the case in agency life.
Well, I've been here long enough that I get to pick the good ones. That's why I work together. So I pass all the other ones off to other people. No, that's not necessarily true. But yeah, you can more easily say no when it's just you, and there's obviously some challenges that come with that. But so do you go immediately from your own work to the job you're in now?
Yes, I saw this position available, and I really looked for that quality of life balance, but that's what was important to me. Having something where it's not, at Ivy Tech, you could get calls at any time where you need to shut down campuses or something happen, or something was just not so stressful, and I had a lot more vacation time, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I had actually never heard of PTO until I moved to Indiana. That was foreign to me.
Yeah.
Which is actually one of the reasons why I left one of my other jobs before I came to Ivy Tech, because I didn't know 10 days PTO was all you get. So, yeah, I thought, there would never be any way I could ever go home or go on a vacation with a little kid.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell us about, in your case, you work with multiple organizations in your current role. Tell us about that. What do those organizations do? What's your role and how do you balance all this stuff?
Yeah, I think one of the things I had to learn, so in this role, I'm the communications manager for essentially 3 corporations, and then we have some subsidiaries. On top of that, we have several major programs within those corporations. For the longest time, I was the only communications person, but more than that, when I started, I made sure to ask, do you have a communications department existing? Do you have brand? Those key questions where I thought, okay, am I going to be building this or I'm going to be walking into something that's already set and run? So it's really interesting when you work at an organization, what they think is set and running versus what actually is.
Yeah. There's different variants on that scale for sure. Yeah.
And, so basically I probably spent the first couple of years just centralizing communication so that everything would come through the communications office. So any brochures that needed to be printed, any reaching out to creative or marketing agencies, advertising, building our websites, SEO, just signage, right? All those different things that you have to do as a communications person. Just building those relationships with key staff and making sure the processes were set up in place to put those checks in so that communications at least had a review.
Yeah. So is the position you're in now, was it a new position when you were hired on?
It was. There was a communications officer. That person only really focused on one of the corporations. What I tried to do going into any role that I've been in is develop, goals and strategies for the communication office that align to the organization's overall goal. Because, typically PR, marketing, they're usually the first to be cut, when budgets get tight. So thankfully, my work in government, we were always cutting budget 5% every year. So learning how to budget and then align what you're doing to the organization's goals is key. So here I changed the focus from Geminis, which is the social service agency, to over on the healthcare side where we actually had more opportunity to generate revenue.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe someday you'll work for an entity that has like a huge budget because you went from government to a public community college. Now you're in, a nonprofit healthcare institution. So you deserve like a rich opportunity to work in a retail establishment where the markup is like 500%, but not
yeah.
yet today. Yeah. So what makes the organizations you work for different? How do you define them when you're talking to people who might not have a lot of awareness about what you do?
That's really interesting, and that's why we wanted to embark on this brand process to really get that input to see, what do people think they know about us, and what do we think we know about us, and then what do we think that people actually, know about us, to really stake our claim and to help with that language. Because one of my faults that I tend to, I think it's just through training, have writing or just language at a higher level where it really needs to go back to the KISS IT principle, keep it simple, stupid. And that's where I always want to have the experts come in and just help us, meet us where our stakeholders are at, so that they get it.
And it's so important in healthcare because healthcare is so complicated, or at least we as a society have made it so complicated, and it's high stakes. People are on edge about the topic, and it's one of those topics that, with very rare exceptions, people don't love to talk about it. And then they get hit with all this jargon, they get hit with all this complexity, and it's hard for them to make sense of it. So the role you play is really critical in kind of translating what is a really complex topic that people don't like to dive into, and make it digestible and make it accessible.
Yeah, exactly. And, healthcare is changing with the Affordable Care Act that put in place to make healthcare transform from a reactive environment, to more proactive. And people expect that now with, a lot of these on-demand features that we can have thanks to Amazon and other retail environments there. The American Hospital Association is doing that research where it's finding that, people want their health care when they want it and how they want it. So, it's I like to joke here that we're on an aircraft carrier stuck in the Panama Canal. Not that we can't even turn it around, right? But we can't decide if we're going forward or backward. But we need to make some movement because the world is moving faster than we are. We need to adjust for that.
Yeah, and we saw that with, telemedicine, the fact that, that was controversial until there was no substitute. And all of a sudden it's widely accepted because people realize, hey, this has real potential. It can't be the only way in which people interact with providers, but it certainly can be a way, and it can make it more likely people are going to, seek some kind of intervention before things get really bad.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the pandemic really changed the way, we are going to be doing medicine for a long time, at least, how we do just general doctor's visits. There's still going to be times where the doctor needs to come in and see you and take blood and do your weight. But I mean, it's not just changing how you and I interact in healthcare. I mean, it's changing healthcare marketing because there are new competitors for us that were never there before. And then for us too, we're regulated by Medicaid and Medicare. So we have different rules than for-profits. And we have a different budget, much lower. So, how do we even, work at the policy level to change that so that we can still be competitive down the road? Because, we can't compete with the for-profits coming out of Texas.
Yeah.
That are advertising telemedicine.
Yeah. The geographical boundaries mean less than they used to, for sure. So, Ericka, I asked this question knowing that there's a lot of things you could talk about. Well, what are some of the major things that are on your plate right now? You mentioned the rebrand. I know you're working on revamping multiple websites. You're doing basically everything. But what are some of the big ones that are kind of occupying your mind right now?
So the two big things are our strategic plan. So we actually started that before COVID happened, and then COVID just transformed everything where we actually had to get most of our staff and then thousands of clients to be able to, be productive virtually. So it was quite a feat for us, especially because when I first walked into this job, we had computers that I had in the 1990s. So, I mean, it wasn't that bad, but it was that bad.
Yeah. Well, they can get pretty dated pretty quickly. Yeah.
And the other one is customer service, because, I mean, people have a choice now in healthcare. And if you don't understand that, and then if you don't recognize that, and then you don't understand it, and then you don't do anything about it, you will be left behind.
Yeah, for sure.
There are always going to be new players in the market, and you're going to have to, stand out in ways that we didn't have to before. And having that customer service is so key. And, we talk about how we want our clients to be resilient so that, throughout their lifetimes, that they can handle anything that comes their way, just not just their mental health or physical health, but their social health. And sometimes I think we get in our own way of helping our clients.
Yeah. Well, and it's another case when you talk about service, it's another case where what people have been conditioned to expect from Amazon and from Trader Joe's, even though those aren't healthcare entities, they're impacting how people look at healthcare. And healthcare, and I know this having worked in healthcare, don't know it as much as you do, but it has not such a great reputation overall as an industry when it comes to service. So there's a lot of room for improvement there.
Yeah, definitely.
So you've got those things. Anything else? What are the other major rocks you're trying to move right now?
The other one is the strategic plan, which is nice. So our CEO asked me and one of my colleagues to spearhead that. So I think that's where we can make the most difference in terms of what are our important priorities moving forward, and changing the culture here across the organization. So those investments in customer service, the investments in technology. I mean, I would love to see an investment in marketing, but if we aren't doing some of those investments in the soft infrastructure that I like to call it, no amount of marketing is really going to help us. So
Sure. Well, and it's starting with the big picture, and then hopefully over time it trickles down to all the different areas that have an impact on the brand.
Definitely.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to switch gears to the speed round of the show, which is where I ask you a few questions that are very much like what we've already discussed, but more concise, hopefully, if I can make them concise. The first one has to do with your career path. You have lived in a different place and come to this strange place called Indiana, where it's cold and where the food is just, mediocre and not as good as it was in Texas. And you have worked in multiple different industries. What's the most important lesson you've learned about building a successful career that you think would be worthwhile for people to hear?
Can I have three?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah, so I think the first one is building consensus. So to me, it doesn't matter if you're working for a government agency or, you're in a nonprofit, making sure that you have consensus along the way with different types of staff, especially if you're either the solo person or a small communications office, will help you down the road in that buy-in, and sort of minimize those folks, those naysayers who aren't going to use whatever product you're putting out, like the website we're working on.
Yep.
Or some of the creative. So it can be painful, but I think, in the end, it makes a better product or offering, because you're considering those different viewpoints that you may not have thought of too.
Okay.
Or you can at least head off potential viewpoints when the final product does roll out. The other one is learning how to handle conflict. Conflict can be something so small as someone doesn't like the copy on something or design, and that can be very, very frustrating. Or it can be, something that affects the whole organization that you want to be able to head off. So I think when your peers and higher up know that you can manage conflict in different situations, then they'll start to loop you in or at least have you have a seat at the table so that you can see if there are potential risks or crises down the horizon and head those off.
Yeah, it goes hand in hand with building consensus too, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And the other one is building trusted relationships with peers and marketing, PR, or communications in general. I can't say how much of it's helped me so much at Ivy Tech just to, learn what other marketing directors or staff were going through and how they navigated, their politics of their campus or their environment, and how I could apply it, in my situation. And that was just so helpful to be able to have that.
Yeah, well, and I think all three of those are related. You're not going to have consensus unless you have trust. And one of the ways you build trust is by managing conflict in a healthy way. So I think that's a great set of three things that all kind of work together. And they're all hard won, but worth working for, it sounds like.
Yeah, definitely. And with my staff, I encourage them to do those things and build those relationships too, because they're an extension of this office. So.
Yeah, sure. All right. Second question. You have a complex job. You work for a variety of different organizations. If somebody stopped you at the grocery store or on the street and they said, tell me what you do, tell me about the organization you work for in 30 to 60 seconds, what would you say? How would you sum it up? I know that's an unfair question because you do so much, but how would you sum it up?
So my son asked me, what do you do? And I'm like, I check email all day.
Yeah, somebody asked me not too long ago, they're like, you were an English major, what's the skill that helped you the most? And I was like, word problems. When you remember, it's like the driver gets in the truck, he's going to Little Rock, Arkansas. I said, that's what emails are. They're just word problems. And learning how to solve those has helped me in my career. But I digress. So what answer did you give your son? That's maybe a great entry point to that question.
Yeah, so I tell him I do communications, where if you see something on TV, like an advertisement, mommy helps with that. Or on the news, mommy helps pitch reporters those stories. So that's one aspect, of what I do. But I do tell them I work for a public health network, where we help people find housing or counseling, or, help them with their physical health needs. So.
Yeah, so it's really the entire continuum of health and wellness across. Yeah. Okay. All right. Last question. You alluded to this. We all have been through a lot in the last couple of years, and I think those who work in healthcare, even those who don't directly provide care, have been through more than most of us. What did you learn, or I should say, are you still learning as we navigate the pandemic? What lessons did you come away with? Things maybe you didn't know before, but that you think will stick with you for the rest of your career?
I think one of the things I learned was being flexible, especially with staff. I mean, communication, we could do our job anywhere, but the pandemic really forced that, situation. And then, the hours aren't always a hard, 9 to 5 kind of thing. But really, I think it might be an old marketing adage where you just have to meet people where they're at. But now even more, it's not just where they're at, but how they want it and when they want it.
Yeah.
And the challenge for healthcare is just getting them to buy into that. But it's also an opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and certainly it's been forced upon us, but I think there's some benefit, especially if, in your case, if you have a young child, you can be a little more flexible and make it all work together. It's still not easy, but maybe a few more options in how you respond to the demands of the job.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, Ericka, this has been a pleasure, as it is working with you. We really appreciate it. Don't tell our other clients this, but you're one of our favorite clients. So Thanks for being so great to work with. Thanks for the opportunity to do good work alongside you. And now we're going to go do some of it, because I have a call with one of your colleagues in about 20 minutes, and you have all kinds of things to do. So we'll close here. And again, I appreciate it. And thanks to everyone who took the opportunity to listen to this episode of the Asher Marketing Podcast. We'll be back next week with another great guest, and we hope you'll join us then.